minutes out of my busy schedule. I'm so in demand, as you can see. I have this giant line.
You had one earlier. And
what can I do for you?
Well, a couple of questions. The question that the other guy asked, what is the most perverse pleasure you get from torturing your characters?
Perverse pleasure I get from torturing our characters?
Yeah.
Perverse. I guess the perverse pleasure I get is I really like drawing blood. I really do. I was a big fan of gore from, like, you know, all the 80s slasher movies and monster films, and it always gave me a shiver when I was a kid. I like to, and I don't know, when it's black and white, I just like drawing that stark blackness on all the white I'm drawing. It really brings stuff out. And when I'm doing color stuff, I just like drawing the picture and then just drawing the red lines over everything. So I do have a perverse pleasure in that from an artistic standpoint. I don't like a lot of blood in real life, mind you, but I just like the splatter and the freeness. It just flies everywhere. It makes everything look very dramatic.
Do you feel obligated to break boundaries in the fantasy tradition, like you wanted to make Dominic Deegan an oracle who had a life other than just waiting around for a hero?
Obligation, that's a good question. Not so much an obligation as more of a desire, because I didn't really see anyone doing it, and maybe my exposure is just limited. I mean, I'm sure the material is out there. Maybe not in webcomics, maybe like in books and comics. I mean, I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I wasn't seeing it, so I felt like I wanted to do it myself. And it's not so much an obligation of it now because, excuse me, I get such a positive response from it that it only makes me want to do it more. You know, like I want to make vegetarian orcs, you know, and I want to make seers who have a life besides sitting in a cave and going crazy with prophecies. And, you know, I mean, it's not like I have this lineup of boundaries I'm going to break. You know, I have an idea that sometimes I think, well, I don't think that would work in a fantasy setting, but then that's only like, well, maybe it will. You know, so it's not so much an obligation as it is like a test for me. Like I wonder what I could do next and how well received it'll be.
You said that most seers usually stay in a cave and go mad.
Well, you know.
But now with Dominic Deegan, he has two things to juggle: the oracling, the professoring, and his girlfriend.
That's to drive anybody crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, I like to keep a lot on his plate. He's the main character, and I don't want to have just one thing going for him because I'm afraid I would get bored. You know, so I mean, to break things up for him as a character, because no one ever really has just one thing going on in their lives. I like to have him be distracted by stuff. I like to have something a little more humorous I can fall back on for a laugh or a joke, to make it more interesting for my readers, and ultimately to keep me sane. I'm not doing the same thing all the time.
You have an intense love of comics. We've seen it in all of your reviews. You love it, especially 52. What introduced you to that love of comics?
Love of comics? It was my father. My dad used to go, and still does, used to travel on business a lot. And one day, I think a buddy of his had just dumped a bunch of comics on him, and he brought home this big cardboard box of comics here. And I didn't know what they were. I mean, I was like maybe 7 years old. And I was reading like, you know, Sergeant Rock and his World War II Commandos, and the Legion of Superheroes, and the Doom Patrol, and I wasn't old enough to go to the comic book store by myself, but they introduced me to sequential art. It really introduced me to cliffhangers, because still, I don't know how half of those issues from my childhood ended. You know, those heroes to me are still like in peril, because like to be continued from like 10 years ago. What happened? So, and then just I fell out of American comics for a while, and then I got into manga when it was just like a book or two in like some comic book store in like a back corner, and there was like 3 movies at Blockbuster, and so the selection was very limited. So it was something very new to me, and I just kind of grasped onto it, and I just rekindled my love for comics. And now I'm back into the American stuff and out of the manga, so I'm sure cyclically I'll get out of the American stuff, go back to the manga, and for the rest of it.
Did you want to take a moment?
Yes. Give me just 1 second.